The door to room 312 opens with a slight creak. Dr. Charlotte Hayes rushes in, holding a tablet to her chest. Her day has been a whirlwind of care and diagnoses, and now another patient is waiting. She lets out a discreet sigh before looking up, ready to face yet another story of pain. But what he finds disarms her completely. David Caldwell, 34, sits on his bed, propped up against his pillows, a book open on his lap. His blue-gray gaze stares at her with an unexpected glow, not of despair, not of resignation, but out of pure curiosity. "You're new around here." Charlotte blinks a few times, surprised by the informality. Most cancer patients who receive it usually avoid eye contact at the first meeting, especially terminal ones, but not him. "I'm Dr. Hayes. I'll be taking care of your case." David tilts his head sideways, watching her as if analyzing something other than her impeccable lab coat and badge strapped to her pocket. "Charlotte, it suits you. Classic name, but with a strong personality." She raises an eyebrow, not deciding if it was a compliment or just another patient trying to break the tension. "I'd rather be called a doctor." "Fair enough. But if I'm short on time, I hope you'll allow me to be a little less formal." She swallows hard. I didn't expect him to talk about his own condition so naturally. Most of the terminally ill patients she sees avoid the word time. But David seems comfortable with the fact that his is running out. "How are you feeling today?" he asks, keeping his tone professional. "Honestly, a little bored, but now that you've arrived, I think my day has become more interesting." Charlotte feels a warmth rise up her neck, but ignores it. She is used to patients trying to lighten the weight of the situation with humor, a form of defense, perhaps. "Do you feel pain?" "Only when I try to ignore the fact that I'm dying," he replies, and a smile plays at the corner of his lips. She stares at him for a moment, trying to decipher his attitude. Is it a coping mechanism, denial, or just a naturally irreverent personality? "If you feel any discomfort, we can adjust the medication." "Oh, of course. Nothing like controlled drugs to alleviate the fact that my body is self-destructing." Charlotte takes a deep breath. He clearly enjoys testing the people around him. But she will not fall into this game. "Do you have family nearby?" David hesitates for a split second. It's subtle, but she notices. "My sister, Emma. But she has 2 young children, and I don't want her to spend too much time here." Charlotte makes a quick note on the tablet. "And your parents?" He lets out a brief laugh, but without humor. "They spent their lives teaching me to be strong. I think now I'm just putting theory into practice." She realizes that there is something unsaid there, but she chooses not to press. At least not now. "Well, David, my job is to make sure you have comfort and quality of life for as long as you have. If you need anything, let me know." She turns to leave, but his voice interrupts her. "Doctor." She stops, looking back. "Have you always been like this?" Charlotte flies a piece. "Just how?" "Practice, director, as if he always knew what to do." She hesitates. "I'm a doctor. It's my job." David watches her for a moment before smiling. "I hope that one day you will tell me what lies beyond the lab coat." Charlotte feels something unsettling turn inside her, but it does not answer. He just leaves, closing the door behind him. Outside, take a deep breath. David Caldwell is no ordinary patient, and for the first time in a long time, she's not sure she's ready for it. Charlotte thought that this first conversation with David would be just another in the exhausting routine of the hospital. But in the days that follow, something bothers her. He's not like the other terminally ill patients she's treated. The next morning, she walks down the hallway and hears a laugh coming from room 312. Laugh. In an industry where most patients deal with the burden of diagnosis, that sounds almost strange. She enters and finds David sitting on the bed, playing chess with one of the nurses. "You cheated, Sam," David jokes, pointing to the board. "That pawn wasn't there." The nurse, laughing, raises his hands. "I'm a nurse, not a chess player, man. Give a discount." David shakes his head, amused, and then notices Charlotte at the door. "Ah, doctor. Did he come to save me from public humiliation?" "It looks like you don't need rescue," she replies, crossing her arms. He smiles and shrugs. "If it's to go, I'd rather laugh." Charlotte analyzes the scene. David does not behave like a terminally ill patient. He doesn't avoid the subject. He doesn't distance himself from people. He attracts them. "Have you always been like this?" she asks, echoing his words the day before. David tilts his head in surprise. "Just how?" "Making fun of everything." "Number." He lowers his gaze for a moment. "I think I started when I realized that there was no point in fighting with the inevitable." Charlotte is surprised by the sudden sincerity. "But that doesn't mean you have to accept everything passively." "No, but it means I can choose how I want to spend the time I have left." She does not respond immediately, but for some reason, he feels a tightness in his chest. She has never met a patient like him, and, for the first time, he does not know how to maintain professional distance. Charlotte never allowed herself to be emotionally involved with a patient. It was a silent rule, a necessary barrier to survive the reality of the hospital. But David made that barrier look fragile. Over the next few days, she found herself looking away from his medical record more times than necessary, studying exams, analyzing reports, looking for any slightest chance of changing their destiny. Until one silent night, as she reviewed her last exams, the truth hit her hard. Markers of the disease had worsened dramatically. His time was running out faster than expected. Charlotte's chest tightened. She had seen this happen countless times, but I had never felt that way. The next day, he entered the room trying to hide what he knew, but David noticed. "You have that look," he commented, sitting on the bed, absent-mindedly fiddling with the string of serum. "What look?" Charlotte tried to appear neutral, that of someone who carries too much weight. She looked away. "Your picture has advanced, David." "We don't have much time." He was silent for a moment, then let out a sigh. "I figured. Do you think I don't notice the looks, the whispers of the nurses?" Charlotte didn't know what to say. He wasn't in denial. He didn't ask how much time he would have left. He just accepted it. But when their eyes met, he asked the question she feared. "Are you afraid of losing me?" She opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. And in that instant, she knew that her life would never be the same again. Charlotte spent the whole day trying to ignore David's question. But the truth was, she didn't have an answer. Or maybe he had, but he refused to face her. At the end of the day, when most of the hospital corridors were already plunged into silence, she found herself in front of the door of room 312, hesitant. She could just go home, pretend that nothing was changing inside her. But instead, he turned the handle and went inside. David was awake, looking out the window. The city shimmered under the dark sky, the headlights of cars forming golden trails in the night. He turned his head and smiled when he saw her. "I thought you had run away from me." Charlotte folded her arms, feigning indifference. "I don't run away from my patients. But I'm not just another patient, am I?" She sighed. "You like to put me against the wall, don't you?" "I only like honest answers." She came closer, sitting on the chair next to the bed. For a moment, they just stood there in silence, until he broke the stillness with a softer tone. "If only I had more time. I would use every second to make you happy." Charlotte felt her heart waver. She could say that it was a side effect of the pain, of the proximity to the end. I could dismiss it as a passing delirium, but he couldn't. "David, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted with a small smile. "I just wanted to let you know." She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a rush of conflicting emotions. When he looked at him again, he no longer expected an answer. He just watched the sky, as if he had just lifted a weight from his chest. And in that moment, Charlotte realized that she could no longer deny it. David had become more than a patient, and that would change everything. Charlotte has always been disciplined, guided by logic and professionalism. But with David, all the rules seemed to crumble. For the next few days, she tried to keep her composure, but every time she entered that room, she felt her heart race. The way he looked at her, how he transformed simple conversations into moments that seemed suspended in time, everything disconcerted her. "I thought you had run away from me." Charlotte folded her arms, feigning indifference. "I don't run away from my patients. But I'm not just another patient, am I?" She sighed. "You like to put me against the wall, don't you?" "I only like honest answers." She came closer, sitting on the chair next to the bed. For a moment they just stood there in silence, until he broke the stillness with a softer tone. "If only I had more time. I would use every second to make you happy." Charlotte felt her heart waver. She could say that it was a side effect of the pain, of the proximity to the end. I could dismiss it as a passing delirium, but he couldn't. "David, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted with a small smile. "I just wanted to let you know." She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling a rush of conflicting emotions. When he looked at him again, he no longer expected an answer. He just watched the sky, as if he had just lifted a weight from his chest. And in that moment, Charlotte realized that she could no longer deny it. David had become more than a patient, and that would change everything. Charlotte has always been disciplined, guided by logic and professionalism. But with David, all the rules seemed to crumble. For the next few days, she tried to keep her composure, but every time she entered that room, she felt her heart race. The way he looked at her, how he transformed simple conversations into moments that seemed suspended in time. Everything disconcerted her. Then, one night when exhaustion and confusion overwhelmed her, she did what she always did when she needed advice. She visited her mentor, Dr. Evelyn Carter. "Are you running away from something, Charlotte?" Evelyn asked, as she absent-mindedly fiddled with the cafe in front of her. Charlotte hesitated before answering. "I'm getting involved with a patient." The older doctor raised her eyebrows, but she didn't seem surprised. "David Caldwell?" Charlotte frowned. "How do you know?" "The whole hospital noticed. Not for what you do, but for what you avoid doing. You never linger in a room, but with him, it's different." Charlotte looked at the cup between her hands, feeling the weight of the confession. "That's wrong, isn't it?" Evelyn saw you enigmatically. "The heart doesn't follow regulations, Charlotte. But you need to know what you're getting into. He will not have a happy ending." Charlotte closed her eyes, feeling a tightness in her chest. She knew that. I knew from the beginning. But deep down, the truth that terrified her the most was another. She had already crossed the line, and I didn't know if I would be able to come back. Charlotte tried to convince herself that there was still time to back off, but when she saw David again, she knew it was too late. He was sitting on the bed, his gaze lost in the window. His face, always lit up by smiles and jokes, seemed more tired that night. "Difficult day?" she asked softly. David turned his face to her and forced a smile. "Have you ever heard someone say they're afraid to sleep?" Charlotte frowned. "Why?" He hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Because every time I close my eyes, I don't know if I'll open it again." Her heart tightened. "David." "I'm not asking you to tell me everything's going to be okay," he interrupted her. "I just wanted you to know." Charlotte felt a lump in her throat. Without thinking, she held his hand. David intertwined his fingers in hers, as if that touch was the only thing anchoring him to reality. "Thank you for being here," he whispered. She wanted to answer, to say that he didn't need to thank him, but in that instant, the words failed. Because for the first time, Charlotte realized that she was not just there as a doctor. He was there as someone who was afraid of losing him. Charlotte couldn't tell when the fear of losing David turned into something even stronger. "I only knew that when I was with him, the rest of the world disappeared." In the following days, they spent more time together. It wasn't just about tests or medications, it was about conversations that went beyond the hospital, about memories, dreams, and things he would never have time to accomplish. "Have you ever loved anyone, Charlotte?" David asked one night, his voice soft but full of curiosity. She hesitated. "I thought so, but now, I'm not so sure." David smiled slightly. "What now?" She looked away, feeling her heart hammer in her chest. "Now it's complicated." He let out a low laugh. "Love always is." Charlotte wanted to deny it, to say that it wasn't love, but when David raised his hand and touched her face gently, the world seemed to stop. "You don't need to say anything," he whispered. "I already know." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time she allowed the truth to reach her. She loved David, and it broke her heart. Charlotte tried to fight her feelings, but it was a losing battle. Their love for David grew every day, even as the shadow of farewell hung over them. One night, after an exhausting shift, she returned to his room and found him weaker than before. His face was pale, and his eyes, always full of life, seemed more faded. "Are you trying to get rid of me?" David joked, forcing a smile. Charlotte sat next to him, holding his hand firmly. "Don't even think about it." His voice came out shaky. David watched her for a moment, then sighed. "Have you noticed that you're suffering for something that hasn't happened yet?" She bit her lip, feeling the tears threaten to fall. "And how not to suffer?" "I know what's coming, David. I know how it ends." He shook her hand, the touch warm, despite the weakness. "Then don't waste our time in fear. Live it with me, until the last second." Charlotte closed her eyes, trying to contain her pain. But when she looked at him again, she knew he was right. They could not conquer death, but they could make the life they still had worthwhile. The days passed like grains of sand running through my fingers. Charlotte saw David slowly languishing, weaker and weaker, but still with that stubborn smile, still making jokes whenever he could. On a silent night, as the rain drummed through the window, she entered his room and found him awake, staring up at the ceiling. "Can't sleep?" she asked, pulling the chair close to the bed. David smiled slightly. "I don't want to waste time sleeping." Charlotte held his hand, feeling the fragile warmth of his skin. "You're not alone." He stared at her, his gaze charged with something too deep to be said in words. "I know, and I'm grateful for that, but I want to ask you something. Anything." David took a deep breath as if he were gathering strength. "When I'm gone, promise you won't turn me into a sad memory." "Hooray, for me, for you, by us." The tears that Charlotte had been holding back for days finally escaped. "You're asking me for something impossible." He smiled, even weakly. "You've always liked challenges." She let out a trembling laugh, holding his hand tighter. In that moment, she knew that even when he was gone, David would always be a part of her. Because some love stories never end. Time was no longer an enemy for Charlotte and David. On the contrary, it has become a precious gift, something to be lived with intensity, without regrets. Knowing that the end was approaching, Charlotte abandoned any hesitation. She loved David with all the strength she had, without fear, without reservation. They did everything they could together. David, even weakened, took her to dance under the stars, as he had promised. Charlotte took him to smell the sea, letting the salty breeze envelop them in a silent embrace. Every moment became an everlasting memory. In the last few weeks, David has grown weaker, but his spirit has never been extinguished. He kept telling stories, smiling at Charlotte as if time didn't matter. Then, on a quiet afternoon, as the sun was setting, he called her closer. "You've made my life something bigger than I could have ever imagined," he whispered. Charlotte held his hand tightly, her eyes teary. "I just wanted more time." David smiled softly. "It doesn't matter how much time we've had. What matters is that we love until the last second." She leaned her forehead against his, feeling the warmth of his skin. They stayed like this, in silence, until their breath became a light sigh. David departed in Charlotte's arms with a smile on his lips, and in that moment, she knew that even though death had taken him, their love would never end. Because some stories don't end, they just turn into eternity. True love is not measured by time, but by the intensity with which it is lived. Charlotte and David taught us that every moment can be transformed into eternity when it is filled with love, surrender, and presence. In the end, it doesn't matter how much time we have. What really remains are the memories we create and the marks we leave in the hearts of those we love. Live each moment as if it were unique. Time may be uncertain, but love, when true, leaves marks that not even farewell can erase. Don't wait for a perfect occasion to show your feelings. Love today, intensely, without reservation. Because, in the end, what really matters is not how much time we have, but what we do with it. What makes a love unforgettable? Is it the time it lasts, or the intensity with which it is lived? Charlotte and David showed us that, even in the face of the inevitable, love can be stronger than any goodbye. Because some stories don't end, they become eternal. And now, we want to know, what would you do if you knew you had little time with the one you love? Leave your opinion in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to know how far this story has come. If this journey has touched your heart, please leave your like to help us tell more inspiring stories. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting stories and share this video with someone special. And don't leave now! On the screen, a link to the next video is appearing. Click and come and see another story that will move you.